a dorsal vagal and shutting down, I'm going to invite you to probably just scoot out from your chair or scoot out from the desk and get a little bit of room. And I'm going to invite you to go bend over, much like you're going into the fetal position. Because this is what we may see with our clients. They may hunker down, get very quiet and still. And so I'm just going to invite you to sit here for a moment or two. And then if you can go on down and even just touch your ankles, if that feels comfortable. If not, then just go down as much as possible and just being aware of how does it feel to be in this position. Some of you may feel really uncomfortable. Some may feel that this is a safe position to be in. But now I'm going to invite you to just slowly come up out of that position. And as you're coming up out of it, being aware of what you feel in your spine. And then as you sit up a little bit taller, just feeling what happens in my system as I feel taller. Noticing how the spine gets straight. Feels like it can support my body a little bit better. And now I'm going to just ask you to slowly come up, step out of your chair, and we're going to put our arms up in the air. And let's be aware of how this feels for us. It's almost like you're running, if any runners are in here, crossing that victory line. And then slowly come down, just allowing yourself, and feel free to stretch if your shoulders and anything that needs to be stretched. Yeah. And so then we're just going to come back and sit in your chair. And let's talk about the awareness of that. How was that for anyone? Felt really good. Felt good? Yeah. But even imagine that difference of being bent over and feeling like I'm hiding versus I'm a victorious person. And so that's really what we want for our clients to be aware of, is how they position their bodies can speak to how they feel at any given time as well. And how can we use that as a way to help them learn to be positioned in a way that creates that power, that control over their life. So the alignment, again, is going to be in our manual, and I'll go to that a little bit later throughout our training if we need it. And we're going to encourage you to practice resources. I did find out we have another person that wasn't on our list. Gabe? Is Gabe? Gabe,
do I have to do it?
You don't have to, but we would love to know just a little bit about you, Gabe.
My name is Gabe. I work at FCC Behavioral Health in Hoffman, Missouri as a therapist, and my
New beginning.
I'll be testing for my LCSW later in the summer. So.
Yay, Gabe. Okay, let's go back to our lecture. I'm going to try to look ahead instead of turning around. I'm getting told that probably isn't how I want to present. So let's look at the different ways in which we're including the model, the method, and the mechanism in EMDR. So when we talk about our model here, or the theory, we've already introduced the AIP, so you're familiar with that. And it's all about informing treatment, so our clients know what we're doing. EMDR is not a surprise, it's not a secret, it's not something that we want to do to our clients. It's something that we want to teach them a better way of living. It also helps us interpret their responses. So we know that when they bend over and they're shutting down, when they're staring away and they're dissociating, we're seeing those things that tell us what's going on with this client without actually having them tell us in words. And then it also allows us to know that we're successfully doing EMDR. Then we look at the method that's involved. Our method is going to include the protocol, which is the basic or standard protocol that we're going to start with today. It also includes those 8 phases that we talked about, and then those 3 prongs we just talked about, which was what? Can anyone get bonus points for the 3 prongs? Past, present, and future. Awesome. And then we're also going to think about the orienting response. We will teach you that tomorrow. The orienting response would be if someone went outside the window of tolerance and we want to bring it back to the present moment. And then also those perceptions in our body. As we were doing that alignment exercise, could you feel the difference between that bent over fetal position versus this position? That's what we want to also be aware of, is what is my body telling me, or what is my actions actually creating some sort of response that allows me to look at how is that being projected to other people, or how does that change my control over how I want to feel versus what I'm remembering or what I'm triggered from. And then we also think about that future template. Now that we will talk about on day 3. So we're not going to talk about that today, but that brings in the future. When you think about past, present, and future, the past is all about the memories. The present is staying here in the present moment so we can process. And the future is all about how do I want it to be different in the future. And then restrictive protocol is one that we will talk about on Friday. It's a very different protocol that we use for a recent event. So it could be something that just recently happened. As Cheryl was talking this morning about the recent event protocol, that is something that if they've had some sort of death in the family, or if they've had a traumatic accident, we don't want our client to carry that for the next 6 months, year, and develop PTSD symptoms. We want to offload that as quickly as possible. So we use a different protocol that will really address that much differently. And then when we talk about the mechanics are BLS, you'll hear us talk about that terminology very often. And then we're looking at that from the eye movements being one of those. We can auditory when you're using the light bar. We have headphones that our client can have a tone that is moved from one ear to the other. And then we have buzzies that they tactile that they can hold, and it buzzes from one side to the other. So there's different forms of BLS. And then when we think about the present perception, what we look at is we're looking through the lens, working through that lens of what's keeping me stuck in the past. Even though I want to be in the present, there's memories that are taking me to the past. So we focus on the present perception. How am I viewing this memory or this event that's happened in my life? And how does that affect how I feel about me? Here is the definition of EMDR, and I'm not going to read that by any means. You can certainly do that. It is in our manual, but it gives us an idea of what EMDR really is. It really helps us understand where PTSD comes from. It talks about all of the different outcomes and studies that have been done. And this is one that was developed by Embria. It talks about the AIP. And so it helps the client feel better about why they have PTSD or why those symptoms are there. It's something that makes sense to them, that it's not about me, that I'm not broken, I'm not faulty, I'm not damaged in a way. We will hear our clients use that terminology. And then it also talks about why the 8 phases work and what that model is all about, and how we want that to not just be about focusing on the past, but coming into the present and living in the here and now versus feeling like I'm plagued by all of those memories from the past and I can't change my future. And so this is a very hopeful approach for our clients. They get excited about it. And let's go into more detail about what the SAFE model involves. When we think of the SAFE model, we're thinking about how we regulate our nervous systems. The ANS, autonomic nervous system, is something that happens very quickly. It's very unconscious. We don't have to think about it. And it's all about controlling, again, our brain, our body, all of those things that are part of our nervous system. The ANS is one that gets calmed by the bilateral movements, the movements of tapping, the movements of the eye movements. And so we'll talk a lot about that, but also attachment. When we think a moment about those of you that work with children or even adults, the attachment, if they have a healthy attachment versus an unhealthy, or an attachment that is not allowing them to feel like they're wanted, they're desired, they're taken care of. And a lot of our attachment, when we think about the different attachment theories, we know, and you studied all of those, we understand that when there is safety in attachment, a child grows and thrives and feels safe to reach out and to contact others. When there is that disorganized attachment, anxious, avoidant, all of the other attachments, those children do not function well in different phases of their life, in relationships, in school, and learning. And so all of those things are a part of how has that trauma changed that child's ability to function, ability to feel like they're valued or they're needed or wanted by someone or cared about by someone. When we talk about the SAFE model again and our principles, our goals are really thinking about this like a table. These are our foundational principles that we focus upon nonviolence. We're not making anybody do anything. We're not telling them you need to do this. We're not directing them in such a way that they feel like they don't have a choice. We invite, we get curious, we ask if those things are going to be comfortable, and you'll hear me say that a lot. I'm going to invite you to do this or that. You can always say no, and our clients can always say no. So we want to give them that choice. When we think about mindful awareness, it's not just these relaxation skills that we do or the fun things of meditation. It's all about what's happening in our bodies. These are resources that really let us become more aware of how the trauma is impacting me, how I'm shutting down, how I'm coming up out of that. And so as we go through those, we'll give you more and more information about that. And when we think about the compassion and assumption, I want to think about what it was like for my client to grow up in their family, what it was like to have being screamed at every day, or to being called names, being cursed at, being things thrown at. What was it like to be them? That's where we think, how can I see what this client has lived through? How can I have that compassion that says, instead of being angry at a client because they don't change or because they don't do what we've asked them to, we have to think about what was their DMN all about. And when we think about, I go back to borderline personality or BPD again, that's what they knew, that's how they survived. How can you be angry at someone that was just surviving? And so we get a different perception of our clients in a way that creates that compassion. I want to understand where they're coming from. It's kind of like when we see a child hiding, we wonder how, that with that curiosity, why is that child feeling afraid? Why is that child feeling like they have to act out to get attention? And so that gives us a better idea of looking at how their trauma has impacted them. And then boundaries. Boundaries are things that we all need. Some of us are great at boundary setting, and we'll talk about that a little bit later today, and how your trauma has impacted you and your patterns throughout life. And so it's a really wonderful way of understanding you a little bit better so that you can treat your clients with the EMDR work. And then we want to think of the SAFE model in a way, let's go back to that, in a way that helps us start out again with that method. The method is going to direct and guide our training or our work with EMDR. Our SAFE concepts is how do you stay safe in relationships with other people, and then those 4 pillars of our principles. When we think about these concepts, and you don't know what the answer means quite yet, we're going to go into that a little bit later. But there are some things that we will be teaching you about the root. The root is all about where did that first begin? What is the root? You know, if you think about the roots of a tree, they go very deep. They go very deep, and they're the stability for most people. So the root under the longing is all about what did they want that they didn't get? What are they needing that they've not experienced? We talk about this sometimes as a missing experience. What did my client miss growing up? Setting healthy boundaries, being able to say no, being able to clearly explain what they want or need. And then we look at radical responsibility. How can I be responsible for those things that are under my control? Finding that theme that's being presented in their lives or throughout their lives, their patterns, their behaviors, their relationships. And then we want to welcome whatever they come in with. We don't want to put judgment on any of their behaviors or reactions because they can look a little strange sometimes. And so we know, I wonder again how that was developed in that child, that individual. And then the C's, the 5 C's of working with the answer, we're going to talk about that a little bit later today too. So you get an idea of what that actually means. When we think about the answer is all about how we use certain behaviors that really either help us or that get in the way, that are strengths, that are very strong components of our life, or that are weaknesses, a little less helpful for us. And so when we think about this answer, this is something that Deb has developed as a way to help us all understand what is our go-to response. Those of you that have grown up in homes where education is really important, thinking about everything is really something that you do well. You problem solve, you're analytical, you learn that that was helpful in your family. And so we look at the answer as something that is beneficial for us, but it also is overdeveloped a lot of times. So all I'm doing is just thinking and I'm not feeling. It doesn't let me get close to my emotions. And so it's helpful in the way that I'm really great at figuring things out, but I'm not so great at talking about how I feel or how things impact me. And so if we think about the answer as a concept, look at each one of those individuals in the picture there and just take a guess about what you think that first person, the gentleman there, he looks like he's wiping his eyes, he's got a piece of paper. I remember in substance abuse treatment, a lot of individuals coming to groups would have to get a paper signed that they'd been there. So all of you are probably familiar with that, or a letter from the PO or whatever that may be. What about the second individual there? As you see her sitting there with arms crossed, what is her posture telling you? You're not getting anything from me. I don't want to be here. I think this is stupid. You're not getting anything from me. And then the third individual there looks like he's in a state of despair. And we look at, and I want you to think about this, as you think about your clients, the answer is all about watching them and seeing, when we think about them coming into your office, what are they presenting when you see them? Do they have their shoulders up and they're proud and they come in and they have a lot of energy? How do they enter the office? Are they opening the door and kind of being, again, excited to be there? Are they slowly coming in, or are you inviting them into your office? And then let's think about body language. What body language do they project to you? I'm hurt, I'm sad, I'm upset, I'm angry. And how do they take control? If they do at all. Maybe some are very passive and quiet. Others are the take charge kind of person, and they ask a lot of questions and they take notes. So how do they take control or hand it over to you? Well, you're the professional. We've all heard that at one time. You tell me when we ask him a question, we're going to respond in that way. What about their voice, their tone, or the amount of talking that they do, or shutting down? Where do they sit? Do they sit right beside you? Do they sit across the room? This is a great one for couples. When your couples come in, where do they sit? Are they right beside, or one on this side and one over here? You get a picture, don't you, of what their relationship is like. So that's what we're really paying attention to with our SAFE model, is what are they presenting to me that I can get a lot of information from. Again, telling us about their family of origin and who they are. And even think about that as a professional. How do you enter a room? Are you quiet? Are you shy? Or you go in and you want to introduce yourself and who you are and connect with people in the room? Or you just go find a place to sit? In the front of the room, in the back of the room? Where do you sit when you go places? Do you want to be seen? Do you want to hide? So those are things that we think about. And then as we look at the answer, this is how we conceptualize the answer. It's all about their boot camp. So the boot camp is understanding from their perspective, how did they grow up? Values and rules that they had in their family, morals, beliefs, all of those things that come into play with who we are as a person. And then the genetic part. That is something, our DNA is something we can't change. We all learn about that, so we can know predispositions for illness, predispositions for height, weight, all of those things, their body, and some of the things that we see. Epigenetics, that talks a lot about that as well. And then about the trauma. How much trauma and safety have they gone through? Is there trauma that is more neglect and you're not seeing it outwardly? They may not have been held, they may not have been told that they were loved, or they may not have been given attention by a parent, or a parent didn't show up at school for a play or a classroom project or whatever. And so that trauma can be harder to bring out in a person simply because that's just the way it was. They become normalized to those things and don't think of them as trauma. But our goal is to think about that answer. It's all about connection. How do I keep people in my life? And protection. How do I keep myself safe? And so as we think about the longing part, we go back to that word. And some people get a little bit confused. What does a longing even mean? Those are those things that we didn't get that we want to. Experiences that we had wished that we could have had from our parents. A birthday party. Some of our clients take holidays because they did not get recognized, they did not get gifts, they did not get a party or whatever that may involve. So our goal here is all about attachment. I want to be loved, I want to be seen, I want to be recognized for what I do. And that connection is all about being seen, being heard, being important to someone. And if we look at that authentic self in the circle there, that is all about how we develop certain personality traits. We look at generational trauma, because a lot of our clients have a lot of generational trauma being passed down from generation to generation, and that can be part of emotional kind of focus on, am I a depressed person, am I an angry person? If we think about also, that was developed in a way to maximize safety. How do I protect myself? Angry people usually use the anger as a way to protect them. When we see an angry person doing this, what do we want to do? We want to, ooh, I don't think I want any of that. And so we back away. That's exactly what they learned growing up in their family, is if I do this sort of stuff, it scares people away and they'll leave me alone. And so we learn about that, and how is that impacting who they are today? They may get a certain reputation of being an angry person, a bully, or whatever that may involve. But it doesn't allow them to connect with other people, because in their families, connection may have been dangerous, or scary, or hurtful. And so it's easier to just scare everybody else away, so I don't have to feel that rejection, or that abandonment, or that loss. And so it's helpful to understand again what the answer involves. When we think about our answers for ourselves, think about the things that you complain about, or the things your clients complain about. So as we look at this list here, if you guys, all of us in some ways or another, getting through grad school and getting your degrees, have been good about learning about thinking. How do I think through things? How do I analyze? How do I take tests? How do I solve a problem? But that may have been developed out of worrying too much. If I'm good at thinking, then I don't have to worry so much about how things are getting handled or solved. And as you go through that list, think about that from your own perspective, or even your clients. If they're good at being productive, because they got no help from anyone else. And so, good at entertaining people. There's a pressure to perform, to be the comedian. A lot of our comedians come from very traumatic childhoods, believe it or not. Most of you probably know that. And we laugh at their jokes, but those are real situations a lot of times. And they carry a lot of sadness underneath that. That's their answer. That's their way of coping. That's what they've gotten good at that helps them live their life. And so it's an important way of understanding. Good at being dependable. All of us like to be dependable, but they take on responsibilities of others. If they came from an alcoholic family or substance using family, If they had the floor cleaned, the meal made, then they were in hopes that the person that was using was not going to drink or use, that they would have the meal with them. But we know most of the time that didn't happen. And so they get very overdeveloped at doing those things that will get their needs met. So if we think about our answer again from an adaptation perspective, those are the things that, again, help us feel safe and connected to others. It is how we attach to other people. It becomes a strength for us in that we get very, very good at it. And it's something we feel proud of because we usually do it very well. But it also gets in the way. An example would be if you're one of those people that volunteer for everything, or you want to be the go-to person at work. And that's great, and you can feel like people really need you, they come to you if they have questions. But it also means that you may be working 80 hours a week. And you don't have time for yourself, and you can't say no to people like I don't have time to answer your question. That then limits you from having a life of your own, from getting your progress notes done, by making sure you've got the things that you need for your own productivity. And so you can see how it's a strength because it feels wonderful, but it also limits us because it doesn't allow us to live our life in the way that we want to. And it's about what we're going to do presently. My answer is all about how am I feeling valuable to my company? How am I getting my needs met by working extra hours and getting more money? But also, it limits me in the way that I don't get to have fun, which is kind of what our new beginnings are about. What do I want to do that I've not done before? What do I want to experience that is something that could be an exciting component in my life? So our attachment is all about that focus. What are those patterns that have been created in a person's life, in your client's lives, that let you know their attachment with their families, with their spouses, their partners, with their children? It can get in the way of their processing because it's something that they use even in session. So if their answer is talking a lot, then as they start processing, they're going to talk a lot because they're feeling uncomfortable or scared or nervous. And so that's their go-to response. I'm going to talk a lot. We can't get much processing done if they're talking a lot. It's protecting them from those emotions, but it doesn't let us make very good progress. It's going to show up in your therapy. Think about how they attend their sessions. If you confronted them about something, then they may not come back the next week, or they may drop out altogether. And so their inability to be challenged or confronted may have come from their families of origin. I was in trouble, or that's when somebody left me. They challenged me and I couldn't give them the right answer, and so they didn't want to be in my life anymore. And so again, we're looking at how those patterns show up. And it also lets you look at opportunity. What does my client need an opportunity to do? Go back to school, to believe more in themselves and their abilities? Thinking about that awareness, how are they learning to use that answer in a way that feels beneficial to them? Here's an idea that we want to think about is how this shows up in your therapy offices. We want to also be aware of not only our clients' patterns, but ours as well. So you see on here that the therapists have their own patterns. What is my procedural way of doing therapy with my clients? How do I approach a new client? How do I introduce myself, or how do I set boundaries with people? Some of those things come from those triggers that we have, and we talked about that earlier. And so those patterns are developed as a way to feel in control in our therapy office. And so that will allow us to see, how is that productive for you? How is that helpful? How is that getting in the way? Because we all have those patterns. And part of understanding, when we think about the attachment part, these are the styles. We think about Ainsworth or Bowlby, the attachment styles. This is the secure attachment is all about those meaningful relationships. being empathetic, being able to set appropriate boundaries, and feeling safe and secure in relationships. The dismissive and avoidant, that is all about the avoidance of those connections, feeling safe or close to someone. They become distant, they're critical, they're sometimes hard to be around, very rigid, very intolerant. And then we think of the insecure attachment. That's that anxious, avoidant type. A lot of times they're going to be controlling, they're going to be blaming, they're going to be erratic or unpredictable. And so it's hard to be around someone because you never know what to expect. And then disorganized, that's where the chaos comes from. They're explosive, they're insensitive, they're abusive, they don't trust other people very often, and they have that reactive attachment. We see that in a lot of children, the reactive attachment disorder. And it's hard to have positive relationships. And our goal here is to think about not labeling someone, but we're again being that curious person that says, I wonder why, I wonder how, I wonder what that was all about growing up, what their family was like. Because it gives us an idea of how those attachment difficulties were developed. And so when we think of that desire to evaluate that, or that curiosity that we have, is I wonder how that was helpful for that child. I wonder how that's helpful for that adult. And so it just lets us, almost like we're being an investigator in a way. I wonder why that's happening. I wonder where that came from. When we bring in the somatic focus here, what we're looking at is how is that attachment regulating them? Are they connected to other people in a safe and comfortable way? And if you think about your own attachments, your attachments to your spouse, to your children, how were those developed for you? We typically teach what we know, what we've experienced. And so we look at patterns of regulation. How are they regulating themselves? How are they calming down? How are they interacting with others? We'll talk about co-regulation in the second weekend. But that's really about giving an example to your clients of ways in which they can control themselves that they've never had before because they're watching you. They're seeing you deeply. They're seeing you use certain behaviors that are very inviting and very calming for them. But it also lets us look at what those patterns and survival defenses are all about for them. Feeling unsafe, feeling scared, feeling nervous, feeling threatened. And then the somatic resources. We're using these in such a way that allow you to be aware of what's happening in my system. What is my body telling me when I shut down? What is my body telling me when I have an upset stomach? It really is about kind of looking at it again from a different perspective. And this is where we bring that whole idea in. How is the therapist patterns in your offices working with your clients? Do you tend to push back when they get angry? Or do you intend to show them that you're coming towards them? So it's a way of helping you look at what are my patterns all about? How have I learned those? When we think about the 5 C's that we mentioned earlier, the first one we want to look at is how do I catch that? How do I know that's their answer? How do I know that's something that they do that was helpful? Then we get really curious about it. Like, oh, I wonder where that happened. I wonder how they learned to do that. Then we want to celebrate that and say, yeah, I can understand why you developed that. And collaborate with it. How can we help you learn new skills, new ways of regulating, new behaviors? And then we make a connection to the past. If they develop that in their family's origin, which is where most of it started, sometimes in adolescence it can start with peer groups. But how is that connected to what they're going through right now? How is that connected to the things that they learn to stay safe? And then we want to make contact with that. Simply just noticing it can be enough. And it's like, oh, that's why I do that. So our clients have a lot of aha moments in EMDR work because it makes sense to them finally. We sometimes have clients come in and they're thinking, I'm coming in for my anger issue. And we want to take them to the past, and it's like, why are we talking about that? This is about now. But it's helping them understand that because those patterns were developed early on, as an answer to protect them, it shows up in their relationships now. And it gets in the way. Gets them in legal trouble sometimes. Gets them in all kinds of difficulties that does not allow them to have healthy relationships. So we're not simply doing this as an exercise. We have the answer, and Catherine and I are going to demonstrate it for you in a little bit. But it's more than that. We have a questionnaire. It has 18 questions, very quick and easy to do. Everybody's going to do that with each other in our groups of 2s and 3s today. And then the answer questionnaire goes into what we call our character types. Our character types is a really cool way of looking at how did that develop into certain characteristics or behaviors that I'm seeing in my clients. And then we look at how was that developed? What's the root underneath all of that? How is that helpful? How is that creating safety and protection or connection from them? And then how does that answer look through those lenses of the 8 phases? How is it being beneficial in our therapy as we process it, but also how is it getting in the way? Does it shut a client down? Does it cause them to pull back and away from you? Does it cause them to feel safer with you? And so those things are going to be an important part of our processing as well. And that last statement there, the most important answer to understand is your own. So we want you to be familiar with your own answers this weekend. We want you to be aware of how is that helping me in my therapy work and how is that hindering me. What's overdeveloped, what's underdeveloped. Because the other side of not setting good boundaries is usually getting taken advantage of. Getting frustrated, getting hurt, getting angry because I didn't want to do that, but I didn't know how to say no. How many times have you heard that from your clients? Quite often because they weren't taught boundaries. So what's underdeveloped is not having clear boundaries. What's overdeveloped is not having boundaries at all, and then they're getting taken advantage of. And then they're frustrated and hurt. So another thing about our answer is that these are the questions that we are going to have you work on today with your partners. And again, very simple questions. There's not a lot of complexity in these questions. There's not a lot of depth to them because we really want them to answer the first thing that comes to mind. And so it gives us, believe it or not, these 18 questions give us a lot of information. Our goal is going to then take those questions and look at what we call the character types. This is a development that Deb had, and the character types are all about identifying how that was helpful, how that was beneficial. You look over here on the left side, and those are the character types that we identified. The rock, the independent one, the hero, the doer, the invisible one, the chameleon, the life of the party. All of those things are part of understanding what do I do when I feel stressed, when I feel worried, when I feel anxious, when I feel out of control, when I don't feel safe. And so that lets us see that, and there's different columns there. We'll use this more tomorrow as well, but we're going to use this to help you find your own character type or what ones you fit into. We have to remember that each character type also is going to manifest in the body some way. So that's a really cool way of thinking about a character type. It's also our go-to way of managing stress. So anytime something stressful happens, you may find yourself getting really busy. You may find yourself focusing upon talking a lot. So we look at that as our go-to way of handling that stress, but it also gets in the way of intimacy. So if we're talking all the time, we're not hearing what our partner says. So it blocks the intimacy because I feel scared. I feel nervous. I feel afraid. And so I'm going to talk a lot, but I don't know the person that I'm sitting with because I haven't allowed them to talk. Yes?
Can you group multiple character types?
Yes, that was the next thing I was getting ready to say. No, don't apologize. That's awesome. You're a step ahead of me. So great job. We do have multiple types, yes. And those come out with different people. when we're with a really strong person, such as a hero, we may get quiet, we may listen, we may be more attentive to them. But if we're with a chameleon, I wonder what we would look like. We may be the one talking, and they're mirroring everything we do. Or they're the people pleaser. They're asking, what do you need? How can I help you? What would be beneficial? All of those things that get received because that, again, is their answer, their go-to way of managing stress. So what we're going to do next is, Catherine and I are going to do a demonstration of the answer for you.